بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيبنا وحبيب رب العالمين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم. Continuing on our reading of Imam Sha'rani's book, the Al-Adab or Al-Anwar fi Adab al-Suhbah, the code of companionship. The next thing that he says is that وَمِنْ حَقِّ الْأَخِ عَلَى الْأَخِ إِذَا اطَّلَعَ عَلَى عَيْبٍ فِيهِ أَن يَتَّهِمَ نَفْسَهُ فِي ذَلِكَ. This is interesting. From the rights of brotherhood is that when one becomes aware of a fault in his brother, he suspects and perceives the fault within himself. ويقول, and he should say, إِنَّمَا ذَلِكَ الْعَيْبُ فِيَّ. This fault is in me. Now how? Somebody else has a fault, so how can you think that it's your fault? Because, and there's a hadith, لِأَنَّ الْمُسْلِمَ مِرْآةُ الْمُسْلِمِ, because the Muslim is the mirror of a Muslim brother. وَلَا يَرَى الْإِنسَانُ فِي الْمِرْآةِ إِلَّا صُورَةَ نَفْسِهِ. And a person will not see him in a mirror except an image of himself. So the fact that you are noticing these things inside of this person is indicative that perhaps that thing is in you. That's why you're sensitive to it, and that's why you're able to perceive it. Whereas other people are just overlooking it, right? So again, this kind of goes back to a person looking at, always assuming good in others, and when you see bad, putting it on yourself. Related to this, وَقَدْ صَحِبَ رَجُلٌ أَبَا إِسْحَاقِ إِبْرَاهِيمَ بْنَ أَدْهَمَ. A man stayed in the companionship of Abu Ishaq, Ibrahim bin Adham. Do you know who Ibrahim bin Adham is? An interesting story. He was the king of Balkh. Balkh is in modern day Iran. It was a big area at that time, very prominent area. Even now, when you study books of Hanafi fiqh, they'll say, okay, the mashayikh of Balkh, they had this opinion, but the mashayikh of Samarkand, they had a different opinion. I think it's a very big place in terms of knowledge, culture, etc. He was the king there, and one night he had a dream, and a voice called out to him, and it said that, Ibrahim, how are you going to find me when you're sitting on a throne? How will you find the one who possesses the Arshul Azim? How will you find him when you're sitting on a throne? And that affected him. There's some other things that are narrated about that happened around the same time. He left everything. He said, I give up my kingdom. And he went out and he lived the life of a poor person, but he tried to become connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He's a great wali of Allah. And it said about him that because he was a good administrator, that's why he was the king. When he left, the administration of the king of a kingdom kind of started to fall apart. So advisors went looking for him everywhere, and they found him on a riverbank, and he had dried up roti that he was eating, dried bread. And he was dipping the bread in the water to make it soft enough to eat. So when they saw him, they said, why did you give up your kingdom for this? You had the best food, now you're eating this type of roti. So then he said, watch this. He said, see, my clothes have patches, right? I said, yeah. So I sew them up, right? I said, yes. He said, watch this. He threw his needle into the river. And then he said, give me my needle back. So all the fish in the river, they came out and they had a gold needle in their mouth. Gold. And then he said, I want my needle. So one fish spit his needle to him. He said, this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can give, right? And he is the famous one. He said that if the emperors knew what was in our hearts, they would send their armies to try to rip our heart out of our chest. So anyway, a man stayed with Ibrahim bin Adham for some time. فَلَمَّا أَرَادَ أَن يُفَارِقَهُ. When he decided to separate, قَالَ لَهُ. He said to him, نَبِّهْنِي عَلَى مَا فِيَّ مِنَ الْعَيْبِ. Tell me about the faults that are within me. I stayed with you for this amount of time, and you're this great scholar, Ibrahim bin Adham. Tell me what faults I have in myself. فَقَالَ لَهُ. He said, يَا أَخِي O my brother, inni lam ara laka ayban. I don't see any fault in you. لأني لحظتك بعين الوداد. Because I look at you with the eye of love and affection. فاستحسنت منك ما رأيت. So I saw goodness in everything that you did. فسل غيري عن عيبك. So ask somebody else about your faults. I can't because I made up my mind that I was going to find only good in you. And وفي هذا المعنى أنشدوا, and some have said this line of poetry: وعين الرضا عن كل عيب كليلة كما أن عين السخط تبدي المساوية. That the contented eye overlooks every imperfection, while the resentful eye magnifies any minor irritation. We see that this happens in relationships as well. At the beginning, marriage for example, at the beginning everything that your spouse does is good, and you overlook anything that you don't like. But then after some time, when time passes, if certain things are not done, then everything that they do, you perceive it in a wrong way, right? And whatever good that they do, no matter how much that good is, you begin to perceive it, you begin to not notice it or cast some negative light on it. We'll read one more and then we'll stop. وَمِنْ حَقِّ الْأَخِ عَلَى الْأَخِ أَن يَرَى نَفْسَهُ دُونَهُ عَلَى الدَّوَامِ. And from the rights of brotherhood is to consider oneself as inferior to his companions perpetually. وَذَلِكَ عَلَى سَبِيلِ الْيَقِينِ. And this should be out of yaqeen. The person should be sure that I'm lesser than my friends. لَا عَلَى سَبِيلِ الظَّنِّ وَالتَّخْمِينِ. Not saying maybe. It shouldn't be an opinion. It should be a reality. فقد قالوا, because they've said من لم يرى نفسه دون أخيه لم ينتفع بصحبته. That one who does not consider themselves to be lesser than their companions, they will not benefit from their company, right? So you might say, okay, but what if the person that you're with, if they're not praying, if they're not doing this or that, right? But perhaps they have some other good quality that you know that you don't have within you. Say, based on this, they're better than me. Because, yeah, I pray, I do all of these things, but I have these faults, and I know I have these faults, and I know that He has this goodness within Him, and Allah loves this quality. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can forgive all of His sins. I could say with surety, He's better than me at this thing, right? And then you'll be able to benefit from Him, because you could look at those good things in Him. Imagine if every relationship that we're in, if both sides are thinking that the other is better than them, imagine how much we'll grow, right? ومن كلام الشيخ أبي المواهب الشاذلي, Sheikh Abu al-Mawahib Shazili, he said, لما علم أهل الله أن كل نبات لا ينبت ولا يصبر. When the people connected to Allah realize that no plant can grow and give fruit إلا بجعله تحت الأرض تعلوه الأرجل, except by being put under the ground, enduring the trampling of feet, جعلوا نفوسهم أرضا للكل. They made their nafs, they made themselves, they made their desires the ground for everybody else. Everybody can trample on me so that I can give fruit. وَمِن كَلَامِ سَيِّدِ عَلِي وَفَا إِنَّمَا جَعَلَ لَكُمُ الْأَرْضَ بِسَاطًا. That the earth has been made it's been made vast for you. لِيُعْلِمَكُمُ التَّوَاضُعُ. So that you may learn humility. فَتَوَاضَعُوا تَنْبَسِطُوا. So then when you become humble, you will expand, meaning your piety and your happiness will expand. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us these good qualities as well. Inshallah, we'll continue tomorrow.